We're going to dismiss the kids back to class, and we're going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 this morning. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. If you want to go ahead and turn there, we're going to jump in here pretty quick. Just to give you a little bit of context as to where we're headed. Last week, as we begin our journey through the New Testament, we met Saul. Saul, the risen Christ on the road to Damascus. God redeemed and reoriented his life, and he became Paul, the great missionary and teacher of the church. He went around and planted churches, wrote letters, and established missionary work throughout the known world, and became probably, after Jesus himself, the most influential figure in our New Testament that we have. And so we're going to read from 1 Corinthians 9, a letter written by Paul that in many ways serves as kind of his method of operation, a summary of how Paul viewed his role as an apostle and missionary. So we're just going to jump in. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 9, starting in verse 19 together. Paul says, "Although I am a free man and not anyone's slave, I have made myself a slave to everyone in order to win more people. To the Jews I became like a Jew to win Jews. To those under the law, like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, to win those under the law. To those who are without the law, like one without the law, not being without God's law, but within Christ's law, to win those without the law. To the weak I became weak in order to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that I may by every possible means save some. Now I do all this because of the gospel, so I may become a partner in its benefits." That's a really wordy passage, isn't it? Let's try to break it down a little bit at a time. Paul begins with this kind of paradoxical statement at the beginning. "For although I am free from all people, I have made myself a slave to all." So he begins by saying, I'm not a slave. And he means a couple of things by that. First of all, literally, he's not a slave. Okay, there are people living in the Roman world who are in slavery, who have masters, who must do what their master tells them to. But Paul has just spent the last couple of chapters presenting his case for his own authority and his own rights, saying, listen, I'm an apostle. I have seen the resurrected Christ. My authority doesn't depend on anyone but the message God has given to me. I speak on my own authority. He's just spent a few verses talking about the fact that he has the right to make his living by the gospel if he wants to. He could require the church to support him because of the kind of minister that he is. He's their spiritual father. And so he starts with this statement, listen, I don't owe anyone anything. I am my own man. I am free both literally as a political free man, a citizen of Rome, and spiritually. I've been set free by the grace of God. I don't answer to a priesthood. I don't answer to a council. My authority comes directly from Jesus Christ himself. I am not dependent upon anyone. I am completely and utterly free and independent. And yet, he says, I have made myself a slave to all. I have become the lowest of the low. I've made every person I meet my master. I serve everyone that I come into contact with. I have humbled myself to the point of becoming a servant to everyone in my life. So what's the difference? How can Paul both be a free man and a slave to everyone he meets? And the answer is, it has to do with his motivation. You see, slaves don't have a choice. Slaves serve their master because if they don't, they get in big trouble. Slaves serve their master because if they don't, they may end up dead. Slaves serve their master because they have to. And Paul says, I have no master, but I willingly choose to make myself a slave to everyone. I willingly choose to put their needs in front of my own. I willingly choose to serve them. You see, for Paul, his slavery is not a matter of obligation, it is a matter of choice and of love. And so if we're going to understand anything that comes next as he talks about becoming like a Jew to the Jews, becoming like one under the, all that wordy stuff that's in there, if we're going to understand it, we must start here. For Paul, he goes through life and every person he meets, he goes, you know what? I'm going to do whatever that person needs because there's a chance that they may come to know Christ through my service. I will make myself a slave to all in order that I may win some to Christ. And he willingly chooses to make that sacrifice. One author I read this week compared it to, do you remember, if you can remember having a small kid in your house, like 18 months, 2 years of age, and all the things you do to child-proof your house? You buy the little plugs to go in and protect your electrical outlets. You put the little latches on the cabinets. You take all the knives and put them on the high shelf. All the little things you do to keep the kid safe. And what's crazy about that is the kid has no idea they're in danger. They have no idea that if they stick that metal hanger in the electrical outlet, bad things will happen. They don't understand that if they grab the pointy end of the knife, it's going to hurt and probably leave a mark. They don't understand, and so they can't protect themselves. They wouldn't go around and put those little safety plugs in. They wouldn't worry about the knives. They wouldn't lock up the bleach because they don't know. But you as their parent know what danger they are in. And so it is the parent who spends the money, and it is the parent who spends the time, and it is the parent who spends the energy to protect their child from what they don't even know could hurt them. And this author says this is similar to what Paul was saying. Paul is going into these synagogues and preaching to Jews who don't even know how much danger they're in. They don't understand that they are living squarely in the wrath of God and they need Jesus Christ to save them. And he's going to go into these Greek marketplaces and he's going to preach about this God that they've never even heard of and they don't even realize how much trouble they're in. And so Paul must be the one to make the sacrifices. Paul must be the one to spend the energy. Paul must be the one to spend the money to save them from themselves because they don't even know that they need saving. And so Paul becomes a slave to all people, makes great sacrifices on the chance that he might win some to Christ. What that looks like practically is what unfolds in the next few verses. And in verse 20, he says, "To the Jews, I become like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, to win those under the law." We'll stop there for a second. We have two categories of people here that are pretty similar, so we'll talk about them together. First, we have the Jews, the people who are descendants of Abraham, living in the promised land, keeping the law. The second group of people are those, quote, under the law, which probably refers either to the Samaritans, who would have kept the Old Testament law even though they weren't considered Jewish anymore, or to God-fearing Gentiles like Cornelius and the Ethiopian eunuch who chose to follow the law even though they weren't descendants of Abraham. They wanted to keep the Old Testament law by choice, not by their ethnic identity. Either way, Paul says the same thing about both of them. I will become like them in order that I might win them to Christ. This means that when Paul went to someone's house and they were Jewish, he didn't bring ham loaf with him for dinner because Jews don't eat pork. When Paul went into Jewish synagogues to preach, he wore clothes that were made entirely of the same fabric because Jews didn't wear mixed fabric in their clothes. It means he kept the Sabbath according to the Jewish tradition when he went to talk to Jews. It means that he only ate the food a good Jew was allowed to eat. It meant he celebrated the Passover and the Feast of Tabernacles with. It means he acted like he was obedient to the law, even though he says very clearly, I don't have to be. Paul says, listen, if I want to eat bacon, I can have bacon. If I want to eat shellfish, I can have some shrimp cocktail. If I want to wear a cotton polyester blend to keep me cool in the summer, I'm allowed to do that. But when I go to see the Jews, if I want them to hear my message, I must keep the Old Testament law to a T. And I am willing to give up my rights. I have the right to eat whatever I want. I have the right to wear whatever I want. Excuse me, I'm sorry about that. I have the right to do a lot of things, and I choose not to because I want my brothers to hear the good news of Jesus. And I would rather sacrifice my right to eat whatever I want and them hear the gospel than me do whatever it is that I feel like I have the right to do and them go, you know what, I'm not listening to you, you're a pagan. And so he says, when I am around those who keep the laws, and I keep all the festivals, and I wear all the right clothes, and I eat all the right food, and I act as if I am under the law so that they'll listen to me. And I am willing to sacrifice all of my privileges that I might win some to Christ. The same principle applies in verse 21. He says, to those who are without the law, I become like one without the law, to win those who do not have the law. He says, listen, so when I go into Gentile towns, I'm in the Greek marketplace, I'm talking to the Athens scholars, I start quoting Greek poets and Greek philosophers. And I wear the clothes that they wear when they talk. And I will talk to them about their false gods. And I'll eat whatever food they serve me. If I go into the house of a Greek philosopher and he brings out bacon, I'm going to eat my bacon. If they want to meet on the Sabbath day, I'll walk to their house on the Sabbath day. I will do anything short of sin. He says, I'm still under the law of Christ. I'm still within the law of Christ. But anything short of sin, I will do in order that they might hear my message. I will learn their culture. I will learn their customs. I will dress how they dress. I will talk how they talk, that I might win them to Christ. And we see this unfold in Paul's ministry. When Paul's going to go minister to Jews, he looks at his buddy Timothy. He says, hey, you got to go get circumcised. Timothy had to be thinking, what in the world are you talking about, Paul? I'm not doing that. But Paul knew that if Timothy shows up uncircumcised, no one will listen to their message. And so he makes Timothy get circumcised so the Jews will listen to them. And when Paul goes and he speaks to those in Athens, he goes to their marketplace and he sees all of their idols and their false gods, and he comes in and he preaches a sermon about their false gods, pointing them to Jesus Christ. Paul's entire methodology of ministry was this: I will become like you so that you will trust me when I tell you that Jesus is what you need. And he was willing to make whatever sacrifices necessary to get there. The fourth category of person he lists is the weak. In verse 22, he says, to the weak I became weak in order to win the weak. He's speaking here culturally. Paul is a Roman citizen, a highly educated man.